He was the man people called when seconds could mean life or death, a trauma surgeon, a mentor, a steady hand in the storm. But one December morning, the man who had saved hundreds of lives slipped. One fall, one fracture, and everything changed. When Dr. Thomas Whitaker woke up, he wasn't in scrubs. He was in a hospital bed, at the very same hospital where he used to operate. Paralyzed, powerless, no longer the one giving care, but the one in desperate need of it. Colleagues avoided his room, interns looked away, and the doctor who once stood with certainty now sat in silence, questioning everything. Could he still be of use? Could he still call himself a healer? Or had he lost the very thing that made him who he was? Everyone expected him to fade quietly, but what no one saw coming was that his greatest act of caregiving, his most human, most healing work, was still ahead of him. Because this isn't the story of a man who couldn't walk. It's the story of a man who stayed. And what he did next would change the lives of people who didn't even know they needed saving. Before the accident, Dr. Thomas Whitaker was a force in the trauma unit, known for his sharp instincts and his sharper focus. He had a reputation for staying calm when chaos erupted, for being the voice in the room that steadied everyone else's hands. Chief of trauma surgery by 42, respected, relentless, but never arrogant, just precise. He was the kind of doctor who scrubbed in early and stayed late, who skipped vacation, missed holidays, because there were people to save, and he believed that was purpose. But that all changed in a single moment. It was a Saturday morning in December, cold, sharp air, ice clinging to sidewalks. Tom was heading into the hospital to cover a shift for a colleague whose wife had gone into labor, coffee in hand, reviewing scans in his mind, thinking about a teenage patient who might need surgery that afternoon. One step off the curb, black ice, a twist midair, a crack, then nothing. He woke up staring at fluorescent lights. From a bed, not a table, a brace around his neck, tubes in his chest, and a familiar voice above him, shaky and solemn. "Tom, it's us. You're at Memorial. You had a bad fall." His own hospital, the one where he taught, led rounds, trained interns. Now, he was the patient. The scans confirmed what he already suspected, his medical mind working faster than his body ever could again. A T6 to T9 burst fracture, complete spinal cord injury, no motor function or sensation below the chest. Paralyzed, permanently, he asked only one question: "Can I still operate?" The silence from his colleagues told him everything. The days that followed were brutal, not just physically, but existentially. His body, once confident and coordinated, betrayed him. He couldn't sit up, couldn't transfer himself to a chair, needed help with toileting, bathing, even turning over in bed. Worse than the weakness was the watching, the quiet, cautious faces of his own surgical team as they entered his room. The residents he once barked instructions to, now whispering, unsure of what to say, the awkward smiles, the too careful tone, the averted eyes. They called him Dr. Whitaker out of habit, but their voices said something else. "We don't know how to talk to you now." Some avoided him altogether. Others hovered too long, offering updates he didn't need. But a few stayed. His longtime anesthesiologist, Raj, visited every evening after rounds, talking to him like nothing had changed. His favorite scrub nurse brought him hospital gossip to make him laugh. And his old med school friend turned neurosurgeon, Alex, sat beside him in silence the night he cried for the first time. Tom's medical training gave him knowledge, but not peace. He knew the stats, the risks, the road ahead, the rehab timeline. He knew what pressure ulcers looked like, what pneumonia could do, what the long-term prognosis really meant, and that knowing was its own kind of curse. Because when you understand every step of your own decline, you can't pretend it's not happening. He tried to stay composed, tried to be the model patient, tried to remind the nurses that he still knew the system. But at 2 a.m., when the lights dimmed and the pain spiked and the catheter burned, none of that mattered. What hurt wasn't the paralysis, it was the erasure. The sense that who he had been was already gone. That in this chair, in this bed, in this body, he had no place left in the world he once ruled. But what Tom couldn't see, what none of them could, was that his greatest act of caregiving wasn't behind him. It was waiting to begin. 3 months into his injury, the hospital discharged him from the ICU. But Tom hadn't left the trauma unit. Not really. He was in a rehab room on the 3rd floor now. No monitors, no teams in gowns, just long days, soft-voiced therapists, and the growing ache of stillness. Rachel, his wife, stayed by his side at first. She organized medications, managed insurance, smiled in front of visitors, cried behind closed doors. Tom tried to be strong for her, but inside, he was breaking. He hated mirrors, hated the sterile scent of antiseptic, hated the clipboard at the end of his bed, listing his name under patient instead of attending. And most of all, he hated the silence. Colleagues who once joked with him in the break room now passed him in the hall with a nod. Some avoided his room altogether, too awkward to face the fall of someone they once admired. Even his residents, the ones he mentored, seemed afraid to speak, like his injury was contagious. He couldn't blame them. He had been them once. He'd seen people lose their careers, their movement, their spark. And deep down, he'd always feared, if that ever happened to me, I wouldn't survive it. Now here he was, and surviving didn't feel like living. Then one morning, Rachel had to leave for a family emergency. The hospital assigned a temp caregiver. Her name was Nora, young, composed nursing student, no-nonsense demeanor. She knocked once and walked in, clipboard in hand, tone clear but calm. "Dr. Whitaker? I'm Nora. I'll be helping you with your morning routine." Not, "How are we today?" Not, "We're going to do great." Just facts. Respectful. Steady. Tom looked away, waiting for the awkward pity to follow. It didn't. She assisted him into his chair with quiet efficiency, adjusted his leg braces without wincing, didn't flinch when helping with personal care. Then she offered him a warm washcloth and said, "I can give you privacy if you want, or I can stay nearby. Your call." His call. 3 words, so simple. But they hit like a pulse returning, because no one had asked what he preferred since the day he fell. Later that day, she came back, not with questions, but with presence. Sat by the window as he ate lunch in silence, until finally she spoke. It must be strange, being a patient in the same hospital you worked in. Tom paused. No one had said that out loud before. He swallowed. "It's worse," he said. "It's like being a ghost in your own story." She nodded, didn't flinch, didn't fill the silence, then said softly, "I was a patient once too. 12 surgeries, 3 years in a chair. I know what it's like when people start looking through you." He turned toward her, eyes sharper now. "You're not just a nurse, are you?" She smiled. "Nope, I'm someone who remembers." That conversation lasted 2 hours. and when she left, something had shifted. It wasn't hope, not yet, but something like oxygen, because for the first time since the fall, Tom didn't feel like a broken surgeon. He felt like a human being, and for the first time in a long time, he wanted to help someone again. After that day with Nora, something began to change, not in Tom's body. His legs were still unresponsive, his arms weaker than before, but in his will. It started with a question. He asked Nora what she wanted to specialize in. Palliative care, she said, because I've seen what it's like to live with pain that people don't understand. Tom didn't respond at first, but later that night he couldn't stop thinking about it. Palliative care, not about curing, but about comforting, not fixing, but being there. And suddenly, his decades of medical experience didn't feel useless anymore. They felt relevant. The next morning, Tom asked his rehab team to bring him a tablet and a stylus. He pulled up the most recent research in spinal cord injury recovery, then requested access to the hospital's teaching platform. He began drafting notes, outlines, case discussions, not for surgery, but for what came after, for the part they never taught in med school. How to talk to someone who's just lost the future they planned for. How to walk into a room without trying to fix and still make someone feel whole. When Nora returned 2 days later, Tom was waiting. "I read your paper on integrative pain management," he said. "You're not just going to be good at this, you're going to change how it's done." She blinked, caught off guard, then smiled. "You still read medical journals?" Tom nodded. Now more than ever. That week he started mentoring her between sessions, not in procedure, but in perspective. How to handle silence, how to notice what's not said, how to stay steady when someone is falling apart. Word got out. Other nursing students started asking for time with him, then residents, then interns from the trauma team he used to lead. At first it felt strange, teaching from a wheelchair, sitting where he used to stand, pausing when his fingers cramped, asking someone to scroll for him when the stylus slipped from his grip. But it didn't matter, because the students weren't watching his body, they were watching his presence. And in those rooms, in those conversations, Tom wasn't just surviving anymore, he was guiding. One student told him, "You teach medicine like it's a language of empathy." Another said, "You made me want to listen before I speak." And slowly, the pieces of the old Tom began to return, not as he was, but as someone new, someone softer, more aware, still a healer, just in a different form, because maybe caregiving isn't about what you can do. Maybe it's about what you're willing to hold, even when you can't fix it. Progress was never linear, and even as Tom found purpose in mentorship, the body he now lived in kept reminding him of its boundaries. The fatigue returned. Worse than before, his fingers, once so steady in surgery, trembled when he tried to type. Some mornings he couldn't hold a pen. Some afternoons he couldn't hold a spoon. He was losing motor strength in his hands, the one part of him he thought he'd kept. A second blow. One night, he dropped his tablet during a Zoom lecture with a group of residents. The stylus clattered to the floor. His hands couldn't retrieve it. He froze. The screen stayed on. Faces stared. Then he ended the call without a word. The next day, he didn't respond to texts. He canceled a session with Nora, told Rachel he was just tired. But inside, the fear came rushing back. What if I can't even teach anymore? What's left of me then? It wasn't just the loss of function. It was the creeping suspicion that he was vanishing again. That even this new chapter had an expiration date. Then came the letter. It arrived by mail, handwritten, scrawled in tight, nervous script, from a young woman he barely remembered, a trauma patient from 2 years before. She had been on the table when he was still operating, a crash victim, terrible prognosis. He'd stayed at her bedside long after the surgery, held her hand when she woke up. She wrote, "I heard what happened to you. I just wanted you to know. I became a nurse because of how you made me feel after I nearly died, not because you saved my life, but because you treated me like I still had one." Tom read the letter twice, then again, because for the first time in weeks, he felt still, but not stuck. He remembered his value had never really been in his hands. It had always been in his presence, the way he stayed in the room, the way he listened, the way he saw people even when they couldn't speak. So he returned, but slower this time, more intentional. He recorded voice memos instead of typing, held small mentorship circles where students asked questions and he just listened, guiding gently with words, not slides. He focused less on performance and more on connection. Then came the moment that proved everything. A new med student, first rotation in trauma, froze during a critical simulation, panicked, overwhelmed, on the verge of quitting. Tom rolled beside her after the session, didn't offer critique. He just said, "I used to think being a good doctor meant controlling the room. Now I think it means staying in the room, especially when you feel like running." The student cried and didn't quit. In that moment, Tom realized he hadn't just returned to medicine. He'd become the kind of caregiver the old version of himself had never had the capacity to be. Not because he could do everything, but because he understood what it meant to have nothing and still offer someone else hope. There was a time when Dr. Thomas Whitaker believed his worth lived in precision, in surgical timing, in steady hands, in the ability to command a room when seconds meant everything. But when the hands failed, when the body slowed, when the noise and rush of medicine faded into the silence of his own hospital room, he discovered something else. Healing isn't just about cutting and stitching and saving. Sometimes it's about staying, sitting in the discomfort, witnessing pain without turning away, holding space, not answers. Tom once defined strength by stamina. Now he defines it by stillness. He once saw himself as a surgeon first, a man second. Now he's simply present. And in that presence, he's more than a doctor. He's a reminder. That purpose doesn't disappear when the job title does. That dignity isn't found in what you can do with your hands, but in how you choose to use your heart. He's not the man he was before. And that's the gift, because the man he is now sees what others miss, hears what others rush past, feels what he used to patch up and move on from. And that is caregiving, not as a role, but as a way of being. Dr. Thomas Whitaker thought he lost everything when he could no longer stand. But what he found while sitting still was a kind of strength this world rarely honors. He didn't return to the operating room. He returned to something deeper. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that worth isn't found in what you do, but in how you show up for others, then let's keep that truth alive. Comment below. Care doesn't end when the job does. Let someone else know their presence is still powerful. Share this with someone who feels like they've lost their place. Let them see what it means to become something new. And subscribe for more stories that honor quiet resilience, unexpected heroes, and the strength it takes to stay. Because here, on Able in Every Way, we believe the greatest caregivers aren't always the ones who stand tall. They're the ones who refuse to walk away.